Well, hello all and welcome back to the Pipe Cottage. Let me fire up my bowl here and we'll get a little bit of a discussion going on. Man, don't I have a lot to talk about today. I wasn't going to make a video today. It's Sunday, March 16th, the day before St. Patrick's Day. But if I don't talk about some of this, I may not be interested in talking about it tomorrow or the next day. You have to kind of catch the thoughts while they're coming. This video is going to be a series of different topics. Probably we're going to be touching on several different issues. Not necessarily one particular topic, but I got a lot on my mind, a lot, in fact, on my mind. And so I'm going to try, and I may not be able to flesh out all of this in one video, but we'll just get it started. Over the past month, I guess, I have been developing some criticisms of the current political status in the United States. But the most interesting thing about all of that are the responses, the comments that I have received from people who watch the channel and who subscribe to it. And I've learned a lot about the massive amount of ignorance regarding American history, even among my Catholic brethren. But more important than that, I've become concerned about the indifference towards American history among my Catholic brethren, particularly in the United States. So some common themes that I've heard from viewers in when they're responding to my defense of the 1787 Constitution, my defense of an originalist interpretation of that Constitution. Most Catholics who are responding to me are saying, well, why do we care about the U.S. Constitution? We are monarchists. Now, I don't know how many of those comments are from Americans and how many are from somebody else around the world. But the question I have is, why do you have to be a monarchist in order to be a good Catholic? Well, that's one among many questions I have. Why do you have to be a monarchist in order to be a good Catholic? Why cannot Catholicism exist in an American context? One that respects and admires the founding principles of the framers of our government, the framers of our society. I do not see a contradiction there. What I see as a contradiction are American Christians, Protestant or Catholic, who simply do not care about the founding principles of the nation. And there's not very much concern about the late 18th century and why, in fact, this country came into being. If you go to Washington, D.C., and you visit the original copies of the Declaration and the Constitution, within the same building, you will see an original copy of the 1215 Magna Carta. The 1215 Magna Carta, one of the most important documents in English constitutional history. England was still very much Catholic in 1215. And what the Magna Carta establishes is the importance of the Parliament and the rule of law. It places England on a trajectory of limited constitutional monarchy, far different from the absolutist monarchy that develops in France and other continental European countries. So when people say, well, we should be monarchists and to hell with the 1787 Constitution, that is, people who are among my Catholic brethren, I wonder to what degree they understand our Constitution is the product of limited constitutional monarchy, the product of English law in the English court system. And just the fact that I hear nobody talking about this, even when somebody is commenting on a presentation that I publish, nobody is mentioning the 1215 Magna Carta. Nobody's mentioning the 1688 Bill of Rights from English constitutional history. No, England doesn't have a written constitution like we do, but they do have a constitution, and they don't always have to be written down. We are fortunate or unfortunate, depending on how you look at it, to have a written constitution. And I think that you would be hard-pressed to find a similar degree of intelligence and genius within the United States today that would have the wherewithal, the historical consciousness, and the genius required to write the document that now and still governs our constitutional system. I read an article yesterday written by Pat Buchanan in 2017, published on the American Conservative website. The title of it is Democracy in a Death Spiral? Democracy requires common ground on which all can stand, but that ground is sinking beneath our feet. It's not our job to make the world safe for democracy. One of the things that Buchanan points out in this article is that this is what Bush tried to do after 9/11, tried to make the Middle East a democratic stronghold. Well, they did not become a democratic stronghold. And he quotes in this article, let's see, he's quoting Secretary of State Dean Acheson. He says, you all start with the premise that democracy is some good. I don't think it's worth a damn. He says, Churchill is right. The only thing to be said for democracy is that there's nothing else that's any better. People say if the Congress were more representative of the people, it would be better. I say Congress is too damn representative. It's just as stupid as the people are, just as uneducated, just as dumb, and just as selfish. And Buchanan says, few would air such views today because democracy has been divinized. It's like it's reached godlike status. And what I like to tell people is that the Constitution never created a democracy. When the Constitution was ratified by the individual states, few people had the right to vote. And yes, the obvious ones are African Americans, women. They didn't have the right to vote. But I've mentioned this several times. the example from my native state of South Carolina, until 1810, you could not vote unless you owned at least 50 acres of real estate. You could not serve in the South Carolina legislature unless you owned at least 500 acres of real estate. And there were very serious, reasonable justifications for that law. The consideration was, the reasons for the law for the most part was that if you did not own property, you couldn't possibly have a vested interest in the outcome of any election. You are prone to demagoguery unless you own property, because you can be swayed from one party to the other based upon whoever sounds best to you. And so when this quote, this was 2017, but at the beginning of the first Trump administration, but it still rings true today, and it has probably been ringing true for 200 years. Congress is too representative. It's just as stupid as the people are, just as uneducated, just as dumb, and just as selfish. The example that the founders used, and Russell Kirk made this argument pointedly in his little book entitled The American Cause, which we have been reading and have discussed in our Pipe Cottage book club. Kirk was very convinced, and I think he was exactly right, that it was the Roman Republic and the history of English constitutional law that motivated the founders and shaped how they understood government and shaped the construction of our Constitution. Speaking of Kirk, let me just quote a little bit from it. Now, you're just getting a taste of what we've been doing in the Pipe Cottage Book Club. This is just a taste. In questions of power, Thomas Jefferson wrote, "Let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution." The purpose of the Constitution is to restrain political power, not to embolden political power. Restrain it. I have told people repeatedly that the heartbeat of the United States Constitution is federalism. Listen to what Kirk has to say about this. The theory of federation is this, that 50 sovereign states have conferred of their own free will certain powers upon the federal administration to promote the interest of the several states and of the people within those several states. And the 9th and 10th Amendments to the Constitution make this absolutely clear. One person who I don't know anything about this person, but he commented on one of my recent videos, said that Dr. Harrelson is living in la la land, that the country we originally had no longer exists. To a certain extent, that's right. But his reasoning for saying that I live in la la land is fairly well ridiculous. And he quotes nothing from the antebellum period, quotes the 14th Amendment, and quotes some random congressional activity from the 1960s. Unless, I am in fact living in la la land, whatever that means, the United States Constitution still exists. It's still very much in control. The problem is, most people don't know that, and they don't care about that. They don't care. Even on YouTube right now, there's this great discussion among pipe channels that we are being demonetized, that our discussion of, let me just fire this up one more time before we talk about that. Pipe smoking channels are worried about being demonetized. cares? If you have something to say and you want to say it, then say it. And don't worry about how much money you're going to make because you're saying it. I wish thinking people, there are a lot of serious thinking people in the pipe smoking world, including in the United States. But they're not telling people about what they believe. They're simply using social media to promote a hobby, to promote this or whatever it is that you're interested in. And there's nothing inherently wrong with any of that. But I think that overall, pipe smoking people are intelligent. They are well read. At least that's been my experience. And if you're intelligent and you're well read, there needs to be a place where you can share your ideas about big topics, whether it be politics, religion, history, theology, philosophy, psychology, whatever interests you, science. But the lack of concern among the people within the YouTube community who talk about pipes pales in comparison to the lack of concern among people who are interested in other issues, in other hobbies, other topics. I mean, it seems like across the board, nobody's talking about anything that's really important. As if we're trying to hide behind our hobbies and hide behind our personal interest in order to avoid discussion of things that have a very serious impact on our everyday life. Now, if you don't own property, if you don't own a business, if you're not a father, if you're not raising children, if you don't care about the church or care about religion, and your intense individualism is what motivates your everyday life, then not only should you probably not care, you should not say anything. You have no right to an opinion. If you're 35 years old and still living in mama's basement and have never achieved anything, and you want to express an opinion about big topics such as politics and religion, nobody should be listening to you. Unless that basement is filled with a library and you've been spending the past 20 years doing nothing but reading and studying, then maybe you have something to say. But usually that's not the case. If you are voting age and you are an American, you need to be able to read and understand the founding documents of the country. And you need to respect them. Regardless as to whether you agree with them or not, you need to respect them. I'm not opposed to limited constitutional monarchy in the English tradition. I'm not opposed to that. What I'm opposed to are Americans, and in my circles, particularly American Catholics, who have never developed a proper respect for our inherited political tradition, our inherited government tradition, our culture. American culture is based, and it was supposed to always be based, on Christian morality, Catholic or otherwise. We have much in common with our Protestant brothers and sisters in the United States. We have much in common. We should not look at our Protestant brothers and sisters and think that they are somehow less Christian than we are. I would prefer that all American Christians were Catholic, but I don't have the power to do that. I'm not told by God that I need to worry about that. And I'm not told by God through the catechism or through scripture that Americans cannot be good Catholics and that there's anything inherently wrong with our government system, our government structure, as originally intended. And I often grow impatient with these people who claim that, and Pat Buchanan mentions this in a couple of his writings. He said that one of the great stains of American history is the heresy of Puritanism. And I agree with that. I've never been a fan of Puritanism either way. That's just Massachusetts Yankee stuff. And I really do not think that American history is encapsulated or best understood by the story of Puritanism beginning in the 17th century. There was a Catholic colony created in Maryland below the Mason-Dixon line. And many of those people moved to my adopted state of Kentucky. They resettled. They settled on the frontier of what is now the state of Kentucky. It's a beautiful story. But I think we are wasting time when we say that, well, perhaps the Constitution is antiquated. Perhaps we should not pay as much attention to it as you think we should. Well, I'm just telling you my opinion. I think that I agree with Thomas Jefferson. Whoever is in power, they must be held accountable by the chains of the Constitution. They must feel the power and the weight of that document, the weight of the history behind that document each and every day they are in office. Otherwise, you do not have a constitutional republic. You have something more akin to imperialism. And yes, I know that there is a history of imperialism in American history, beginning with the defeat of the Confederacy in the 1860s and moving on through the results of the First and Second World Wars. But there's been no constitutional convention held to destroy the 1787 document. It's still there, and it deserves respect. You can be an American Catholic. You can be an originalist in the vein of Antonin Scalia. I was watching an interview with Antonin Scalia late last night. We had a big thunderstorm came through, and it was real windy, and I couldn't sleep. And so at 2:30 in the morning, I was watching an interview with Antonin Scalia. And the interviewer said that before Scalia was confirmed in 1986, which incidentally is the same year I was born, no law school was talking about an originalist interpretation of the Constitution. Nobody was talking about it. Actually, you were hard-pressed to find anybody who would give you a law degree if you were motivated by originalism. What is originalism, for those of you who don't know? It's simply the notion that we should interpret the Constitution based upon how the founders intended it to be understood, the original meaning of the document. And it's not strict constructionist interpretation. And Scalia was good on explaining the differences between those two. But the interview, and this was probably in 2013 to 2014, he said, since Scalia has been confirmed, it's very difficult to find a law school in the United States now that does not realize the importance of originalism, just because of the work of one person on the Supreme Court. You don't have to win all the battles. Even if you win no battles, it doesn't mean that the convictions of one's belief are automatically wrong. I believe in an older America. I do not believe in my time. And the first person who I encountered as a literary artist to explain this perfectly was Ben Robertson from South Carolina. In his 1941, he was a journalist. He died in a plane crash as he was going to Europe to cover the Second World War. But I wrote a chapter in my master's thesis on Ben Robertson. He was from the Kiowa Valley in South Carolina, in the upcountry. His family farm is now under a lake, so it doesn't exist anymore. But he told a story about his grandfather Bowen, who was a Confederate veteran, and he said that his grandfather witnessed the defeat of the Confederacy, poverty that it created, and he always told his grandchildren that he didn't believe in his time. He didn't believe in 1920s, 1930s America. And that was 100 years ago. And so he never made an attempt to equip his grandchildren to succeed in modern America. Because what it takes to succeed in modern America endangers the soul. It endangers the independence of the mind, of the thinking man. And I think the situation is 100 times worse now, a century later. Unfortunately, most Americans have been convinced that this is the way it's supposed to be, that we gain our education from the internet, and whatever people on the internet say is true, that's what must be true. And I recognize the hypocrisy of even saying that on a YouTube video. But as I once told my students when I was teaching in real classrooms, I said, if there's only one thing that you learn from me, learn to think for yourself. The internet age has given us a great deal of benefit and a great many problems. Ignorance is no longer an excuse for irresponsibility. You are responsible for discerning what is right and wrong from the internet material that you consume. You are responsible. In my grandparents' generation, when they were coming up, they didn't have exposure to the internet. They were responsible for the information that they learned from their parents, and that they read, and that they encountered in their life experience. But today we are bombarded by a massive amount of information from different walks of life, different perspectives, through the internet. And if you are not well read, if you are not well grounded in what you believe, you are prone to be swayed from one side to the next very easily. You are prone to demagoguery. Whoever speaks the best or speaks the loudest or speaks according to what you think sounds good rather than what might actually be good, then you are easily swayed. Kind of like what Scripture talks about in the book of James. You don't want to be tossed around like a ship from one wave to the next. You need to be well grounded. You need to be well anchored in what you know and what you believe to be true. And so that's why I am in constant defense of tradition, of reading, of a proper education, and over the past couple of years, a major defense of the Catholic Church. So this is a rambling video, but for the most part, I wanted to address this, well, really two issues that I've noticed coming up in the comment section on my recent presentations. The first is that Catholicism is incompatible with American history and American constitutional law. No, that's a bunch of hogwash. The second is that, well, the Constitution is a dead letter. It doesn't matter anymore. Over the course of the past 150 years, the Constitution has been trampled on by everybody. And so why should we continue to care about it? The only way you will ever continue to have a country in the United States is if you start caring about the original meaning of the Constitution. Otherwise, you don't have a country. You don't have an identity. You have nothing other than demagoguery, and you're prone to dictatorship. Just not totalitarianism, I don't think, but you're certainly prone to becoming less than what the founders envisioned us being. So that's enough for today. This is Alan Harrelson with the Pipe Cottage. Thank you for stopping by.